On March 6, 1857, the United States Supreme Court issued perhaps its most controversial ruling ever. One legal scholar said about this particular ruling that it was, quote, universally condemned as the U.S. Supreme Court's worst decision. What decision did the U.S. Supreme Court make? Let's take a look. Our story starts with a slave named Dred Scott. Scott eventually came to be owned by a U.S. Army surgeon named Dr. John Emerson. During his time with the Army, Dr. Emerson was posted to forts in Illinois and Wisconsin. During the time he traveled with his master, Dr. Emerson, Dred Scott married and had a child. Eventually, in 1843, Dr. Emerson died, and Dred Scott and his wife and daughter were inherited by Dr. Emerson's widow. 3 years later, in 1846, Scott attempted to buy his family's freedom, but he was turned down. Wanting to be free, Scott decided to take another approach. He sued his former master's widow for his freedom. Here's the main legal argument Scott used in an attempt to gain his and his family's freedom. Scott argued that since he had lived in both a state and a territory where slavery was outlawed, he should be free. In Illinois, slavery was outlawed by the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. In the Wisconsin Territory, slavery was outlawed by the Missouri Compromise. In other words, Scott argued that living in a free state or territory made him a free man. His court case, called Dred Scott v. Sanford, made it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1856. In March of 1857, the Supreme Court issued its ruling in a 7-2 vote. The ruling did not go as Scott hoped. The majority opinion, argued by Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, made three main arguments. First, they said that since Dred Scott is not a citizen, he cannot bring a lawsuit in a U.S. federal court. Second, they said that Congress had no right to restrict slavery in any of the territories. Lastly, the court argued that living in a free state and territory did not make Scott free. His quest for freedom through legal action ended in failure. The court's decision said that Southerners could take their slaves into all of the remaining territories, which meant that all the territories would become slave states in the future. The South was thrilled with the ruling. The North was not, to say the least. Not only was the ruling a horrible decision from a legal perspective, but it also further divided the North and South and pushed us closer to civil war. So, what became of Dred Scott? His story actually ends well. His former master's widow moved to Massachusetts and married an abolitionist. He convinced his new wife to sell Dred Scott to the family who had originally owned him. They promptly set him and his family free.